started. Okay. All right, how does that look for everyone? Great. Okay, well, thanks again, Maggie and Ryan, for having Kayla and I tonight. We're excited to chat with you all a little bit about working lands conservation programs, what they are, as well as some resources and strategies for success. I'll start us off with talking a little bit about the Center for Rural Affairs, which is where both Kayla and I work. The Center for Rural Affairs exists to create vibrant rural communities. We do this through small business training, lending, working with communities, farmers and ranchers, and policy change. And Kayla and I are actually both a part of the center's policy team. Our policy team is kind of unique in that we have staff located in different states. I'm actually calling in tonight from Lyons, Nebraska, and Kayla is over in Ames, Iowa. So we were making a joke earlier that we can kind of track the storm as it moves through our area tonight. And to kick us off too, I'll just provide a little bit of context about the work that I do and why it's relevant to this topic. I've been at the center for almost a year now, and a big part of my job is to talk to farmers and ranchers about federal programs, specifically in this case, the Conservation Stewardship Program and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Our staff does work on both the state and federal level, but I work primarily on federal programs. So Kayla, I will also give you a minute to introduce yourself and chat a little bit about your work as well.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Again, my name is Kayla Bergman, and I'm based here in our Nevada, Iowa office. I've been with the center for a little over 3 years now, and I lead our ag policy team. So we, like Kalee said, work at the federal level to ensure that these working lands conservation programs are strong for those of you that are interested in using them, and do a lot of work related to the Farm Bill cycle. And as you know, our current Farm Bill is expiring next year. So a really exciting time to be in the space, and we'll talk more about opportunities to engage throughout this presentation.
Awesome, thanks Kayla. All right, so diving right in. What are working lands conservation programs? Honestly, when I started working at the center, I didn't know what working lands conservation programs were, at least in the literal sense. So I wanted to provide that definition up top. Federal working lands conservation programs are federal programs administered by the United States Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service that provide financial and technical assistance to producers for implementing conservation practices. And the unique thing about working lands conservation programs is just that. These programs allow farmers and ranchers to continue doing what they love, which is agriculture. It's growing crops, it's raising cattle. And so to reiterate, these programs help farmers implement conservation without giving up those livelihoods and that income stream. So to kick it off, I would like all of the participants to take this poll. I'm just curious how familiar you are with working lands conservation, and we'll start there to get us started. Okay, so this looks like we've got a pretty good span of familiarity levels, which is great. And I'm hopeful that there's something for a little bit of something for everyone tonight. We're going to start with the basics for those of you who are brand new to working lands conservation. And hopefully for those of you who are very familiar, there will be something new that you can learn, or maybe you can help us out with answering some questions when the time comes. All right, so I want to kick us off by talking about the USDA's two flagship working lands conservation programs that we also happen to work on and advocate for here at the center. So the first of these is what we most commonly hear of as EQIP. It's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And EQIP assists farmers in investing in conservation practices, often for the first time. There's no conservation experience required. So it's really great because whether you are a brand new farmer in your first year or two of farming, or maybe you're a third generation farmer who's been farming for 3 decades, you can probably find a way to engage in conservation through EQIP. Because it's a bit of a starter program, the contracts typically only last 1 to 3 years, so the commitment is relatively low to get started. They're project-based, and they're usually, the practices are chosen to address a specific resource concern. And resource concern is something that I will define a little bit for you later in the presentation. But an easy way to think about EQIP is, usually there's like a problem that a producer has on their land. An easy example is erosion. And EQIP could help you get a cover crop planted to help with that erosion. So pretty straightforward. And here are a few other examples of practices and the, I guess, the problem that they help address. So cover crops can be planted to reduce erosion in an overworked field by helping hold that soil together. Terraces can be built to reduce water erosion on a hillside. I'm sure we all know that one field that is desperately in need of some terracing. No-till to reduce erosion in an overworked field. And then, because I tend to use a lot of erosion examples, I wanted to throw in the example of a field border, which can be used to reduce fertilizer runoff into a local watershed. So pretty direct problem being addressed through a practice. The second program that we focus on from the USDA is CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. And there are a few key differences that really set this apart from EQIP. The first difference is that CSP is really for those farmers who have already shown that they have an investment in conservation and they're willing to take those practices to the next level. So obviously one of the big differences here is that some conservation experience is required. If you're a beginning farmer and it's your first year in farming, CSP probably isn't for you, but that doesn't mean that you can't work your way there after a year or two. Because it is a whole farm contract, the contracts are 5 years in length. And what I mean when I say they're a whole farm contract is that instead of focusing in on one problem on a micro level, CSP kind of takes your conservation out to a macro level and kind of looks at your whole farm, how it can be improved as a whole, and you're going to be implementing multiple practices or enhancement to take it to the next level. So to illustrate how an EQIP practice, in a sense, can become an enhancement in CSP, I've put down a couple of examples on this slide. So in my first example, let's say that you're planting cover crops to reduce erosion. As a part of your CSP plan, you might select to plant a diversified cover crop. So something that we like, I've heard it called like a cocktail of legumes and grasses that can really then start to restore the health of the soil. I spoke with one farmer recently who his story is exactly that. He had a field where he had terrible erosion, signed up for a 1-year EQIP contract to get those cover crops planted, and now he's planting more diverse cover crops and actually looking at making sure that his soil isn't only in place, but that it's recycling the nutrients in a natural way. A second example of an enhancement might be, starting with a field border that you put in for wildlife habitat. but then enhancing it by planting a mix that includes some pollinator species. So I have the definition here, but I think it's worth reading aloud. An enhancement is an additional conservation activity a producer installs or adopts on their land under CSP contract terms. So CSP for those farmers who are already invested in conservation but want to do more. Okay, so before we dive into eligibility, I want to get a little bit more of a sense of where everyone is on their farming journey. So if you could answer these next couple of questions, that'll give me an idea of your farming experience and what kind of land you are operating.
All right, we're just over 50%. How about a couple more answers and then I'll close the poll. All right, I think that's what we're gonna get.
Okay. Great. So it looks like we have some experienced farmers tuning in, which is always great to see, as well as folks who own the land they operate or operate families' farmland. Great. So the reason that I asked this is just because everyone's experiences are so different. And I think that that can bring up a lot of questions about eligibility. So I thought that this would be a good place for us to kick off the next section. I have a couple slides to click through here about eligibility. Kind of the natural progression of this conversation is that people learn about the program. It's something they're interested in, but then, that big question, am I even eligible to apply? So a few things. The great thing is that most farmers and ranchers are. Of course, there always be a few exceptions, but there's no minimum requirement for years of farming experience for EQIP or CSP. I do like to say that, kind of like the asterisk there, is that obviously if you're applying for CSP, you need that conservation experience. So chances are you've maybe farmed for more than a couple years. All sizes and types of operations are eligible to apply. We've spoken with farmers who have almost, homestead size type operations to, multi-generation 5,000 acre corporations. So the sizes, there's a lot of flexibility in the size of your operation. And then also type. I know that, speaking in Iowa, the majority of folks over there are farmers, but we know a lot of ranchers in Nebraska, South Dakota, and Kansas who also use these programs, as well as organic farmers. A couple of things to note is that to be eligible, you must be the owner or operator of eligible land, and eligible land is defined as cropland, pasture land, range land, and land used for agroforestry. We don't get that one as much here. And then you must have at least $1,000 in annual sales that comes from that operation. So the biggest question that we usually have heard when we talk about eligibility is, what if I rent my land? There seems to be hesitation there from producers for whatever reason. But the good news is that even if you are just a renter, you can apply for CSP or EQIP. You don't need to own any land. The key, however, is to make sure that you're talking to your landowner about your plans to enroll in either EQIP or CSP. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is just that obviously, it's their property. If you're going to be putting in a structure like a terrace via EQIP, they're going to want to know about any permanent changes being made to their land. And secondly, it's a good idea to talk to them, because at the end of the day, a lot of these practices are really an investment in their actual soils, and will be things that will, ideally make their property more profitable over time. So if you have a hesitant landowner, that's always one good thing to bring up when you're talking about the benefits of practices and enhancements we enroll in through EQIP and CSP. Another important thing I should say about this, though, is that there are some situations where a landowner might be interested in participating in the financial aspect of these programs. So we'll use that example of installing a terrace through EQIP again. They might be interested in helping with the upfront cost of putting in that terrace and receiving some of the financial assistance in return. Some of them may prefer to be hands-off, and that's okay too, but it's just good to make sure that that's squared away before you apply. And then all NRCS asks is that along with your application, you submit a signed letter that just acknowledges that you've had this conversation with your landowner and that you're in some type of agreement. And that's not a binding contract, just kind of like a letter of good faith that all the parties involved are pleased with the decision to move forward. Okay, I threw in this GIF here just to give you all of your eyes a little bit of a break, but I will say that when I was first learning about these programs, it felt like a lot of information coming at me. So if you feel like Zach in this GIF here, that's totally okay. But we're going to launch into talking about the actual application process now. So you love these programs, you're excited, you have figured out that you're eligible, so what's next? So where do I begin? If you have driven through any number of small towns in Nebraska or Iowa, chances are you have seen one of these USDA Service Center signs. And if you haven't been, now is the time to familiarize yourself with your local USDA Service Center. And if you aren't familiar with where your county's office is, I'm going to have Ryan drop a link into the chat. That's actually a really great tool. I think you just enter your zip code and it will take you right to the address of your local center. So for those of you who haven't been into your USDA Service Center, which I'm guessing probably isn't many of you given your years of experience, but these offices house two different USDA offices. The first of these is the Farm Service Agency, FSA, and chances are if you've applied for any type of farm loan, you're familiar with them. They handle a lot of loan programs, disaster assistance, that kind of thing. The second office that we're going to focus a little bit more on this evening is the NRCS office, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And their job is to work to protect and conserve natural resources through financial assistance and technical assistance. So the big question here is, how familiar are you with your local USDA Service Center? So I'll give you a minute to answer that. Okay, and the results are in. Again, we have a really good balance of folks here tonight, and I love to see that there's actually a few of you who are very familiar with your center staff. They know you by name. That's always great to hear. Okay, so the reason that I bring this up is because I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the relationship you have with your NRC office is really key to the success of your application. Obviously, it's not everything, but it can, having a good working relationship with them can really at least help you make your application the best that it can be. And I like to just point out here that the last 2 years have been really hard with COVID. And a lot of these USDA service centers being closed for walk-in appointments. If offices are anything like my local office, face-to-face conversations is really their bread and butter. And so I'm excited to hear that a lot of offices have been opening back up for appointments, because I think that has, you know, they have definitely done what they can with the virtual space, but I think they will be glad to have their doors back open for those face-to-face appointments. Okay, so a couple of things to think about when you're answering the question, how do I prepare for a visit? So I think, you know, kind of your mantra should be the more details I have, the better planning that I can do. And, you know, time is tight for everyone. You know, you're farmers, you're busy in the field. The NRCS folks have, you know, a lot of things going on as well. So it's good to make your time together as productive as possible. So there's a few things that you can be prepared to talk to your NRCS staff about. The first 2 items here are just kind of like, you know, basic, like, what is my farm? How many acres do I have? Do I have corn and soybean rotation? Do I have any cattle? You know, how long have I been farming? Just kind of those basic questions about your operation. And then, excuse me. And then the second half of that conversation should really focus on your conservation goals and any practices that you're interested in trying. And having some goals in mind will just really help your NRCS staff member understand where you're coming from. And this could be, there's really no right or wrong answer here. Going back to the example that I've been using all evening, maybe your goal is just to decrease erosion, you know, period. That's it. That would be okay. But you might have other conservation goals. My family has done a lot of conservation because they care about wildlife habitat. So that might be something that you're interested in, or you want to clean up your local watersheds because you want your kids or your grandkids to be able to play in the creek the same way that maybe you did. So it's good to have those goals in mind, because that will kind of drive you forward. And then don't be afraid to bring up practices that you're interested in trying. Like, it's very common, I think, for farmers, you know, to go into NRCS and say, hey, I have a neighbor who has been doing no-till and I'm interested in trying it. Can you tell me more? If you don't already have a farm number, I do want to say that you almost have to like pump the brakes before you go any further and get a farm number from your FSA office. And the reason I bring this up is because they're necessary to apply for either of these programs. So a farm number is issued for free and allows access to key USDA programs, including Working Lands Conservation, farm loans, and others that require farm records to be shared. So make sure you have a farm number if you don't have one already. Okay, preparing your application. This is definitely the part of this process where you'll likely become best pals with your NRCS staff member. They'll really guide you through the process. And as much as I wish I could claim to be the expert here, they are really the ones who will hold your hand through this process. But the application form requires a few different things. Similar to what we talked about before, they're going to want kind of that personal information, kind of the basics about you, your farm. They'll also be working with maps, which makes sense because you're kind of, you know, you're looking at like where fields are and where certain practices will be put in or implemented. And then based off of that information and your goals, your NRCS staff will look through a whole list of practices for you to choose from. And with their help, you'll select some of these practices based on your conservation goals or priority resource concerns. Okay, and moving on, I wanted to just define for you priority resource concerns, because this is something that will come up fairly often throughout this process. So priority resource concerns are specific categories of natural resources concerns related to soil, water, wildlife, and more. And these are set by NRCS for each state, often with stakeholder input. And essentially, these just help NRCS kind of break down all of the potential problems that we're maybe facing and put them into categories so that they can be strategically met with these, with different practices. So in Iowa, some examples of current priority resource concerns are wind erosion, pest pressure, and water quality. And again, you won't be responsible for knowing these or knowing exactly what practices will help address them. That's something that your agent will help you with. Okay, so I think this is maybe my last poll question, but now I'm curious to know, have any of you ever applied for EQIP or CSP? Okay, well, we're talking to the right crowd then. That's great. 80% of you have not. So hopefully this, might provide some encouragement for you to give it a shot. And it looks like 2 of you have and have received a contract. So that is great to hear as well. Okay. So those of you who have applied are probably familiar with the application deadlines that are set for applying for CSP and EQIP. They're different for every state, but typically in Iowa, we see 2 application deadlines, one in the fall and one in the spring. We actually have one coming up here shortly. I believe April 8th is the deadline for EQIP and new CSP contracts, and April 15th is the deadline for CSP renewal contracts. A little bit of insight into how this process works. You might hear someone speak about application deadlines as batching dates. And essentially what that means is the federal fiscal year starts in October. So that's when they have their biggest bucket of funds for these programs. So what happens is, farmers are applying for CSP and EQIP all throughout the year. And then come October, it's kind of when NRCS says, hard stop. We're going to consider everyone who has applied before this date. We're going to consider them and rank them for funding. Then, in the meantime, farmers are still applying for CSP and EQIP. We get to April, there's still some money from that larger pot left. And again, NRCS says, hard stop. Now we're going to consider everyone who has more or less applied since October. So I say that to reiterate that you can go into your NRCS office and apply for a CSP or EQIP contract at any time. Just these application deadlines kind of determine when your application will be looked at and the other contracts it will be up against, so to speak. How are applications ranked? I broke this up into a couple of different sections to help illustrate kind of the thought process behind how applications are ranked. And the best phrase that I could come up with, however, overused it might be, is that for these conservation programs, they're really looking for a good bang for their buck, right? They want practices and contracts that are going to do the most amount of conservation for the least amount of funding. And honestly, you know, that's fair in my mind, because we are on, you know, a limited budget for CSP and EQIP. So it makes sense that they would want to do as much as possible with those dollars. So things that you might consider with your NRCS staff member are things like the cost effectiveness of the practices or enhancements you would like to implement, performance of those proposed practices. You know, are they going to have a long-term effect on your land? The number of priority resource concerns addressed. So let's say, you know, this is kind of the two birds, one stone analogy. If there's one practice that can target both, let's say, erosion and runoff, that's probably going to help you get ranked a little bit higher, because it's one practice addressing multiple concerns. The magnitude of environmental benefits, as well as just compliance with regulations. So because these programs, you are receiving money through the federal government, you have to make sure that you're following those regulations that also often coincide with farm loans. So for example, the one that I am familiar with is if you're, you know, tiling somewhere where you're not to, that might get flagged and would affect your application in a negative way. The second part of this that has a little bit less to do with the actual practices themselves and the environmental effect is what we call ranking pools. And ranking pools are essentially set up to help ensure that there's a more equal distribution of dollars within EQIP and CSP. So sometimes these are determined by watersheds or geographic regions, special initiatives within each program. But the two that I like to point out specifically are not only ranking pools, but actually separate funding pools for organic or transitioning to organic farmers and beginning or socially disadvantaged farmers. And what this means is that there's actual, if you are an organic farmer or you're a beginning farmer, you're actually put into a ranking / funding pool with other organic farmers or other beginning farmers. So it makes the competition more fair, I guess. So you're not, you know, a small organic farmer that's in the same pool as maybe, you know, larger commodity crop farmers. So the great thing about the beginning and socially disadvantaged ranking pool is that 10% of funds are actually set aside for beginning or socially disadvantaged farmers. So it's really important to point these things out when you're talking to your NRCS staff member, because oftentimes these specific smaller funding pools are undersubscribed. There's usually a little bit of money left over, meaning much less competitive if you fit into one of those categories. So that's something to be mindful of. So, you know, I think like when I first learned about these programs, I had this idea that there was like one really smart person in each NRCS office who could look through all of these applications and rank them. And I think once upon a time that was the case. But within the last few years, USDA and NRCS have actually developed a program called CART. And CART is the Conservation Assessment Ranking Tool. And this is essentially a software that helps NRCS assess and rank eligible applications. So it takes a bit of that manual pressure off of the staff. Okay, I inserted another GIF to kind of lighten the mood. You guys have really been hanging with me, so thank you. Obviously, like if you're here, you probably have really good intentions and you probably care about conservation and soil health and water quality. But I think we would all be lying if we weren't also interested in these programs because of the financial assistance they provide. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next. So diving into the money aspect of CSP and EQIP, there's two things that I like to make sure people understand up front. The first is that CSP and EQIP are reimbursement programs. So that means when you are accepted for an EQIP contract, again, if you're putting in those terraces, or you have a CSP contract and you're going to do cover crops and field borders and maybe a terrace, just say, keep using that example. You have to be prepared to cover those costs up front, and you'll be reimbursed typically in October. The second thing that I like to point out is that the reimbursements are only for a portion of materials and implementation costs. So it takes some, while these reimbursements definitely help alleviate the pressure of trying some of these new practices, they don't take it away entirely. So it's good to do some planning up front to make sure that you're financially prepared for your contract to start. Payment rates can differ from farmer to farmer, practice to practice, state to state. Sometimes they switch from year to year. So it's good to make sure that you understand that, work with your NRCS staff before diving in. And the payments are also considered taxable income. So something to think about as well. There is one special note that can make a big difference for beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers. And this is the advanced payment option for EQIP. And this is a special option for historically underserved groups that provides at least 50% of payments up front to purchase materials or contract services. So this is, designed to alleviate some of that pressure that can come with, say, being a beginning farmer when you don't have a lot of capital. But say you really want to try cover crops through EQIP, you can get 50% of that payment up front to help cover the cost of that seed so you can get it in the ground. And it's just kind of a neat option. Also, it's good to note with this advanced payment option that the money must be expended within 90 days of receipt. So, don't spend it on a vacation and then buy the seed later. You have to, show that you've bought the seed within that 90 days. Otherwise, the NRCS will take that money back. And it's also, I think, really important to note that this isn't a funding or a ranking pool. This is an option, so it's not competitive. So if you're considered a beginning, veteran, limited resource, BIPOC farmer, it's important to say that to your NRCS agent because you are eligible for this advanced payment option. Okay, how are payments figured? We're going to look at EQIP and CSP separately because they're a little bit different. So typically within these practices, there will be, an annual payment, and it's usually based on a unit or a structure. So I've outlined some examples here, and I believe these are the actual 2022 payments for Iowa. And so you can see there as an example, if you're planting a winter kill species cover crop, you'll be awarded $23.04 per acre. A 3-row windbreak, $1.07 per foot. So those are kind of like those per unit measurements, but some things that are more structural are just like a one-time payment. So if you're getting a solar pump for a pond, you'll get $1,016.87. We switch over to CSP. I have the same examples here, but you'll notice that they're a little bit lower. So for a cover crop, again, winter kill species, $6.94 per acre. That 3-row windbreak, 13 cents per foot. And the solar pump for the pond, $203.37. And there's a reason that these are, even substantially lower than they are for EQIP. And the main reason for that is that when you're paid for CSP, you're also going to be compensated for 2 other things, for existing conservation and also different land use types. So on my next slide, I have this illustrated to help give that example like a little bit of color. So you're getting your payments for practices and structures plus payment for existing conservation. So the first part of that is your just straight up land use. Like you're getting paid for having a crop or pasture on an acre basis. So if you have 300 acres of cropland, you're going to get paid $7.50 an acre per year just for having that land use existing. Then they're going to look at those different land uses and see how many resource concerns you've already met on each of those land uses. So let's say, you have met two resource concerns. Maybe you're addressing erosion and pest pressure. And each one of, you get $300 for each of those resource concerns already met. You're getting $600 a year. So you can kind of see how that helps balance out the difference between EQIP and CSP a little bit. A little bit more color I can give to that is just that, EQIP, we're starting farmers and ranchers out in conservation, and we want that package to be, as exciting as possible. By the time farmers and ranchers get into CSP, usually the intent is that, like the wheels of the train are moving and they're, you're on your way to conservation. And we want it to be practices that are sustainable even after the financial assistance has ended. So that's kind of another reason why we see those payments generally lower as time goes on. Okay, I have included this last slide of Jerry finishing the race for a couple of reasons. I'm almost to the end of my presentation, and I really appreciate all of the focus that you have all given, but also because, sometimes I think applying for these programs, it can be a bit of a challenge for folks. So it's good to, hold strong, get the support you need, and you'll definitely make it to the finish line. So enough for my cheesy analogy, and I will move on to a few key takeaways. So if you, leave tonight and remember anything, these are the things that I want you to remember. First of all, I just want to reiterate that, if you have the capacity to become a friendly face at your local USDA service center, I think you'll be pleased with how much easier the application process is for you. And again, I think that these offices really enjoy the one-on-one interaction. So call, use that locator to find your office, give them a call, and set up an appointment. The second thing that I want you to take away from this presentation is really the importance of setting short and long-term conservation goals. From the farmers that I've talked to, it seems like the most successful have gone through the exercise of setting these goals for themselves, because it doesn't, I think then it adds a little bit of heart to these programs that can give you the drive to keep going. Third, I just like to say you have to be willing to do more practices or more enhancements than your neighbor is maybe one way to say it. Unfortunately, EQIP and CSP are both oversubscribed and underfunded. So there will be, a lot of farmers and ranchers who don't get into these programs each year. So it's just good to remember that they are competitive. So you have to be willing to do a little bit more and do a little bit of the extra work. And then I added this one in at the last minute, but because these programs are competitive, I think it's really important to know if you qualify as a part of an underserved audience, whether that be organic, beginning, socially disadvantaged, those things that I mentioned earlier, because if you don't share that with your NRCS staff, you might be put into an even more competitive funding pool than you need to. So that's something that is great to remember as well. I also just want to say, before we dive into the questions portion of this webinar, is that I think I mentioned this at the top of the presentation, but a lot of the information that I've shared with you today has come from a list of frequently asked questions that myself and my colleagues have developed over time from talking with farmers and ranchers about these programs. And we've actually created a really great series of fact sheets that not only covers a lot of what I shared today, but goes even a bit more in depth into some of the specifics for CSP and EQIP. So we will definitely make those available to everyone as well. So we have made it to the end, to the Q&A section. And I think we still have a good amount of time left. So I will mute myself for a minute or two and let Maggie and Ryan take a look at the queue to see if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kalee. So yes, we do have some questions. I'm going to actually rewind back to the beginning. And somebody asked, is orchard included in cropland when considering these practices or these programs?
I can answer that, Kalee, if you're okay with that.
Yes, please do.
Orchard is considered a farming operation. As Kalee noted, there is a minimum income requirement of $1,000 in sales for the year. So just keep that in mind. But that's certainly a qualified operation.
Great, thank you. And then I was curious, maybe I should know this by now, but what does a farm number look like? Like, can you give me a little bit more information on like what a farm number does? Like you said that you have to have a farm number to apply for these programs. Like what else is a farm number used for? And like, what does it look like?
Yeah, well, what I can tell you is that it's a unique ID. Kayla, you might be able to actually speak more to the actual format of a farm number. But yeah, it's a unique ID that the way that I understand it is, you know, when you go in to apply for a loan or for a CSP or EQIP contract, you know, you're entered into this, what I imagine is a pretty massive system of producers. And your farm number is just that unique tag. So it's probably makes it easier for NRCS staff to differentiate you. You know, if there's farmers with similar names, you know, that can get messy, operations with similar names. So it makes your identification truly unique within their system.
Yeah, all of what Kalee said is true. And this is something that if you receive any subsidy payments that you would have already through FSA, and it is a matter of just verifying that you own the land and that you know, sort of have management over it. And if you don't, you know, if you are renting it out to somebody else, verifying all of that information, and then they assign you a number, and then you have this formal piece of paper that comes in the mail to you that says this is your farm ID, and you have to forever keep that in your safe space so you know what your farm ID is, because that's what applies to you when you're applying for a CSP program. Of course, these files are still on record at your USDA office, so if you misplace it, of course it's still there, but that kind of is sort of just like your identification for what your operation is in the USDA world.
Great, thank you. And then thanks to Alan in the chat too. He chimed in with an example of what they might look like too. There a while back, somebody asked about specific dates in October and April for, I think, enrollment. And you had mentioned something about the 8th of April and then the 15th of April. Could you share what those specific dates were again for reference?
Definitely. So we do have upcoming deadlines in April, like you just said, Maggie. The April 8th deadline is for EQIP and new CSP contracts. So when I say new CSP contracts, I'm referring to if you've never applied, this is your first CSP contract, you would apply for the April 8th deadline. April 15th is for renewal CSP contracts, and that's something that I didn't talk about in the presentation. But essentially, after a 5-year CSP contract is up, producers can apply to renew that contract for an additional 5 years. So they're given a separate deadline of April 15th. And then, excuse me, I can't recall exactly when our 2021 October deadline dates were, but do you have them, Kayla?
I just want to say that I noticed there's quite a bit of people that are outside of Iowa in the conversation. So I think the most important is to point to a website that all these dates are listed to. I'm going to grab that quick and put it in the chat so you can all just click on it and save it.
Yes, thank you, Kayla. That's actually a great point because these deadlines will vary from state to state. One great thing is that within the last year, NRCS published publicly, kind of repeating myself there, but made a public announcement of all of their application deadlines for the states. So that was a big win for those of us who anxiously await a newsletter or a press release from NRCS announcing those deadlines. But yeah, like Kayla said, we'll share that with the group because that will be really helpful no matter where you're located.
And there was another timeline question. Can you discuss the 12-month timeline for EQIP? Not sure if and then they said no exceptions. Is there a top person that can make an exception for a longer time period on complicated projects?
Yeah, so I guess the way that I think about this is that, you know, applications are accepted on a rolling basis. So when applications, Kayla, I'm wondering if you have a better way of answering this than I am currently.
Now let me read this again. Can you discuss the 12-month timeline for EQIP? No exceptions. Is there any top? Make an exception for a longer time period for, so you're talking about the practice implementation for the 12 month. I'm not sure about the sort of extension. I would assume that there is a form to fill out to sort of apply for an extension for those complicated projects. I'm sure there's a process for that, but I don't know for sure like how often that's granted and specifically what that process looks like now. It's an oxbow restoration with removal of the trees here. Got it. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty large project. So I would assume that there again is a process for that. And it sounds like I think you're the same person that commented that you're having a good relationship with your NRCS office. So that would be something to ask them for sure.
And somebody just asked, are prairie strips an eligible practice?
They are, yes, absolutely. It's I think it was an addition maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and really excited to see that come to fruition.
And are there any funds for permanent fencing?
Yeah, within EQIP, there is a fence practice. Kaylee, you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, we actually see a lot of our the ranchers that we talk to have installed permanent fencing through EQIP. I think it is a big part of rotational grazing, and also I believe there is a practice too, it might even be an enhancement within CSP for wildlife safe fencing, which is also kind of a unique practice. But yeah, that is a practice that we see and is pretty common with ranchers.
Great, thank you. What percentages of EQIP and CSP applications are awarded? You said that it's pretty competitive. So how competitive is it?
Well, if I'm recalling a recent statistic I heard, I believe that nationally only about 20% of CSP applications are funded. So unfortunately, it's a pretty thin slice of the pie. I'm not as sure on a specific percentage for EQIP.
I would like to make that a little more optimistic. That statistic that Kalee is referencing is all applications. It comes to just under half, so like 47% of applications that are like qualified applications. So truly, like you know that you qualify and you have all of the paperwork and your farm sort of fits into the basic requirements. About half the people that truly qualify for all those reasons get accepted. So it still is a competitive program, but it is worth applying for. And EQIP would be probably more than that, actually, because it's single practice and there are more funds available there. I don't know that number for sure, but I'm sure it's higher than CSP acceptance rate.
One thing I would also add too is that once you've applied, your application is, and if you apply and you're not accepted into a round of funding, your application is actually rolled over into the next batching date. So if you're feeling discouraged at all, it's good to know that if you put that work in up front and you don't get in, it's not over. Like you can continue to have that application considered. You can work to strengthen it with your NRCS staff. So it's just, that's also a good thing to know. If you don't get in, your first round, keep trying, because chances are you'll, maybe pick up a contract that second time around.
All right, and then if you're a veteran beginning farmer that wants to organically farm an impaired watershed, would you likely be awarded an EQIP program?
I think the answer is yes. We got specific feedback from NRCS in Iowa that the organic applicants were, the program was undersubscribed. So I would say if you, check all of those boxes, your chances are pretty high. And definitely let your NRCS staff people know that that's where you're coming in from too.
And are you told your rate when awarded the cost share?
Yeah, I would. Can you say that question just one more time, Maggie?
I wish I would have noted when they asked this. And if you're still in the audience, maybe you could clarify, but they said, are you told when they asked when are you told your rate when awarded a cost share or the cost share?
Yeah, I believe that that is the case. Obviously, they want you to be able to plan the financial aspects of the contract. So when you get that contract, it should be, made clear to you how much you'll be receiving come October.
Yeah, before you sign on the dotted line saying, I essentially accept this contract and I agree to do the work, you will see a dollar amount there.
Great. Mercedes said, yes, thank you. So we got it. What is the meaning of limited resource? At one point, you were talking about limited resources. Could you define what that means?
Yeah, so I saw that question and I wanted to pull up the appropriate website, and I'm going to, sorry for all the links, but I'm going to dump this into the chat as well. So this is the historically underserved definitions page on the USDA website. And so there are some terms for limited resource, meaning with direct or indirect gross farm sales, not more than the current index value in each of the previous 2 years, and who has a total household income at or below the national poverty level for a family of 4, or less than 50% of the county median household income for each of the previous 2 years. So there's some specific definitions there, and there's also a tool to decide if you qualify based on your personal information. So I encourage you to check that out to see if you actually qualify for that or not. And then all the other definitions of veteran farmer, socially disadvantaged, all of the people of color and that kind of thing are all defined in this website as well.
Great, thank you. All right, let's see. Going back to what programs like CSP and EQIP will cover, are there any funds for old stagnant ponds that are needing of a clean out? So reviving natural water sources or something along those lines.
That's a really good question. I can't say that I know the answer to that, but 2 things that I will respond with is just saying there are, hundreds of practices. So, and I know that there are some related to ponds. Like I have seen those as I've skimmed through the list. But that might be something that if you do, have an appointment set up, that would be like a great example of a question to take into that initial appointment you have with your NRCS, because that's the exact type of thing that they can help you answer yes or no, and if so, point you to the specific practices that would apply.
The last question actually goes back to the farm number question. Somebody was curious, what happens to a farm number if you buy or sell part of your farm?
So the way that I understand it is that the farm number actually stays with the farm. I'm looking to Kayla to make sure I didn't mix that up, but it actually stays with the farm. So if you're selling the entire farm, I mean, it's like I said, that number goes with the farm. I believe if you're breaking it up, if you're breaking up one farm into 2 different parcels or 2 different farms, I believe you have to go into the FSA office and decide which parcel keeps the current one and a new number is assigned to that second piece.
Great, thanks. Do we have any other questions in the chat? I think I got them all, but I'm just going to kind of scroll up and make sure there aren't any that I missed.
These were great questions. Thanks for asking them.
Yeah, nice questions, everyone. That looks like it might be it. Thank you so much, Kalee and Kayla, for taking the time to, talk to us about CSP and EQIP and some strategies for navigating them tonight. And Kalee, I'm glad that a storm did not come through and knock out your internet or power or anything.
I did hear a little bit of thunder a few minutes ago, so we're just in time.
All right, great, perfect timing. Thank you everybody for turning out to tonight's Farminar. Our last Farminar on pesticide drift will be next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Welcome you all to join. Take care and have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.